NBC1260.com.
And good morning and welcome to Beyond the Curve, providing strategic insights on international business and international law. I'm Jeffrey O'Brien alongside my co-host, Dr. Adriana Sanford. Dr. Sanford has 6 years of law school, including a double LLM in taxation law and international comparative law from Georgetown University, a law degree from Notre Dame, and she also has a degree in political science. She's currently working on her latest degree, an executive M.B.A. in global management. She has 4 languages under her belt: French, Spanish, Portuguese, and English. She has represented numerous multinationals, serving both as in-house and as external primary U.S. counsel. Good morning, Dr. Sanford.
Good morning, Jeffrey.
Our guest, Deborrah Himsel, is an adjunct faculty member at the Thunderbird School of Global Management at the Milano School, as well as the Helsinki School of Economics, where she has taught courses in leadership, international human resource management, group dynamics, and organization development. Debbie holds an M.B.A. with a concentration on organization development and a bachelor's degree from the State University of New York. She's a recognized expert in leadership development and author of Leadership Soprano Style: How to Become a More Effective Boss. Over the last 5 years, she's appeared on Fox News, CNBC, and Bloomberg. She also wrote weekly expert commentary on The Apprentice for USA Today. Good morning, Deborah.
Good morning.
Good morning, Debbie.
Good morning.
Could you talk to us a little bit about IHRM?
Yes, as more companies are doing business all around the world, it becomes increasingly more difficult to find talent in some of these markets. I do a lot of work taking executives into some of the emerging markets, India, China's not so emerging, Vietnam, and the laws and regulations in each country are different. What some of their issues are different. What it takes to get people from whatever country it is to go to some of these countries and work to take their families there can be very challenging, and then once they stay there, to bring them back. And I find that there aren't a lot of companies that have human resource people that really understand what's going on in the different markets, that have the real business sense about what it takes to do business in the markets, as well as can really think strategically about how do we want to manage the talent flow that's going in and out of some of these companies. And there aren't a lot of universities that are having specific programs in this, and some of this just gets very detailed also. So being able to have the resources to know what you need to do in each market is a continuing challenge.
Is this a skill that people should be learning, even if maybe they're not planning on going to another country? Can that help them in their interactions here?
Yes. And a lot of what we do at Thunderbird is a lot of cross-cultural differences and understanding what it's like to be from the culture that you're from and how you need to understand that about yourself to be able to adapt when working with different cultures and people from different countries, and how to know that just because, let's say, you're from the United States, that not everything we do in the United States is right, or just because it's here in the United States doesn't mean that it can be done better in another country.
Shh. Bill O'Reilly might hear you.
You can probably tell a little bit of my political bent as well.
What do you believe are some of the biggest challenges that leaders are facing today?
Well, one of them, which is I think you can probably identify with as well, is that leaders tell me they're working just nonstop 24/7, that with all the technology, the globality of work, they are on the go all the time, expected to respond instantaneously, and it's becoming more and more difficult to really maintain the work-life balance. They also tell me that the workplace is becoming increasingly diverse, generational differences, so it's not just the younger generation. They've got the baby boomers, the older generation, people coming back into the workplace, the diversity of multiple cultures, and it's just becoming increasingly difficult to adapt their style and to figure out how to motivate the workforce. So those are just a couple of them.
Okay, and what is your advice for them?
Well, the 24/7, that's a difficult one because some of them are saying, but, my boss is saying I have to be available all the time and keeps canceling my vacation. And the best advice I have is to try and focus, to keep priorities, and also to remember at the end of the day, your family's most important. And that's a difficult one because with the economy, people are sometimes just fearful to say, I have to have a vacation or I have to take a day off or to say no to the boss. So that's a tough one.
Now, a leadership book based on the fictional mob boss, Tony Soprano, that's a unique approach. How did you come up with the idea?
Well, obviously I'm a fan, or I was a fan of the show, and I would watch it, and I remember it was the first season, the last episode, and the character Tony Soprano pulls his team together and tells them that he's seeing a psychiatrist, which in the mob is a no-no. You don't tell your secrets anywhere else outside the family. And he pulls them together, and he said, I'm going to have some news for you that you're not going to like. He tells them that he's seeing a psychiatrist, and then he said, okay, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, give it to my face, and then we're not going to talk about this again. And I looked at that and I said, wow, for a leader to be that open to their people and to basically say, give it to my face, give me feedback. I had seen few leaders that were really that open and honest with their people. And I started watching the show a little differently, picking up some fun metaphors. And I was doing a lot of training and development at the time. And I would use clips from the show to highlight points. Or I'd say, well, what would Tony do? And they would come back and they just would get some of these concepts really quickly. And I said, well, to myself, I said this, maybe somebody should write a book about this. And I said, well, why doesn't that somebody be me? And so then I wrote a book, and it was just great, had a lot of fun with it, and it helped me also in my own leadership journey.
At the time you were working where? Was this with Avon or Pfizer?
Yes, I was Vice President of Organization Effectiveness at Avon Products, and so I was doing a lot of executive coaching, organization transformation, and leadership development. So I was actually using some of the tools before I wrote the book in my job at Avon.
You devote in your book a chapter to charisma. Do you think that you can actually develop charisma?
I do, and it was a fairly controversial chapter because about the same time my book came out, Jim Collins' Good to Great came out, and he actually in his research had found that charisma was not that important based on business results in his research. But in my own experience with leaders and coaching leaders, it was always that elusive, now we call it the X factor, but something that you knew a leader when you saw it and you could say, oh, they have it. But it was difficult to put your arms around it or define it. And so I set out to really define it and to try to give leaders some tools and advice on how to develop it. So I believe you can develop it, and although it's contrary to Jim Collins' research, I believe that it's important.
Now, you adapt the mob tool of a sit-down. Hey, we're going to sit down. We're going to talk. It's a conflict management tool for companies. Hey, let's have a sit-down. I get nervous anytime. Nothing good has ever come from, hey, you got a minute?
Uh-oh.
But can you go a bit into more into detail on that?
Yeah, well, let me just step back and say how I got to this concept. When I was working at Avon,
which is a lot like the mob.
I'm glad I'm not there anymore.
I'm kidding. I don't want a bunch of ladies running me off the road.
We had a very kind of messy matrix organizations where you had corporate trying to tell the local markets what they needed to do with products, and the local markets, they were kind of battling back and forth. And the CEO said, we need some kind of way to escalate conflict and the disagreements that will inevitably happen between local and global. And so I was in the midst of my leadership journey in Tony Soprano, and I said, well, maybe we could adapt the Mob Sitdown for ourselves for escalating conflict. And, people looked at me like I was a little nutty, but I adapted the sit-down to use to mediate conflict that may exist in an organization. And basically, a sit-down can be requested by anybody. It's facilitated by neither boss but an external third party. In the mob, it's usually the consigliere or an underboss, and the decision that the third party comes up with is binding. And there are agreed upon rules and a process, and there's fact-finding that's done beforehand, and it's mediated, and people kind of tell it straight to each other, and at the end, there is a decision. And it works really well.
And no retaliation?
No retaliation. That's part of the rules up front, too. No retaliation. And the other thing is that sometimes decisions get reversed in organizations, and you think you have a decision, and then it gets overturned, and the decision is binding. That comes out of the sit-down.
Interesting.
And the only thing that happens is you get a pink slip. Nobody gets whacked.
No, that's right. No one gets whacked.
That's
no
important.
Pink slips either.
Can you give us some other examples of how companies that you have counseled have used your book?
I've used it a lot in helping companies with coaching and delivering feedback and tough performance messages, because a lot of companies, they get very soft, or they have leaders that have difficulty delivering the tough messages. And so really using it to deliver straight talk and have back and forth conversations has been extremely helpful. A national auto parts store used that, and it was very helpful and in a fun way to get their leaders just more comfortable with having these conversations. I used it with an architectural firm to develop their emerging leaders, again, in a fun way, the younger generation, about just some of the basics of leadership and managing people.
So, Deborah, what about Tony Soprano's flaws as a leader? You told us about how it was impressive the way he led when he brought everybody together. What were some of his flaws?
Well, for one, he kills people.
Well, yeah, there's a big one.
That's a major one, and
you can't go to HR with that.
No. And also, in all seriousness, he leads by intimidation and fear. And as we know, that may get you far in the short run, but really doesn't get you there in the long run. The other thing is, for those that watch the series, he was very volatile and had a temper. And what I will really highlight with leaders is that you really have to learn to manage your emotions, manage your temper. It's good to have passion, but you can't one day go for somebody's throat and then be really nice to them. And the last thing, and there are probably some bosses out there that are bullies, but the character of Tony Soprano was probably clearly a sociopath. So he had some fundamental flaws, I think. But he also, again, as I mentioned in the book, had a lot of really good qualities that all leaders could really learn from.
All right, well, that's great stuff. Be sure and check out her book. It's called
Leadership Soprano Style.
Thank you so much for being with us. Deborrah Himsel, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll have more Beyond the Curve right after this.